Rabbi Dr. Abraham J. Twersky, Zichron Livracha, who passed away a few days ago, tells this story about an atheist who had joined his 12-step program, which is, of course, a non-sectarian program, and was told by his sponsor that he needed to pray as part of the program in order to release himself from addiction. The man protested. He said, "I'm an atheist. I don't believe in God." The sponsor insisted, "You have to pray anyway." And sure enough, the fellow started praying. The sponsor asked him, "Do you believe in God now that you started praying?" The man said, "No, I actually do not." The sponsor asked him, curious, "Then how do you continue to pray?" He said, "I continue to pray because every day that I pray, I remind myself that I am not God." And Rabbi Dr. Twersky, one of his ingenious contributions to the world at large, but also more immediately to the Olam HaTorah, was the way in which this man, a Chasid from the dynasty of Chernobyl, had such deep insight into the human spirit, how he actually was able to relate to people of all walks of life. This direct descendant of Rabbi Menachem Nachum Twersky of Chernobyl. This past Saturday night, past Motzei Shabbat, we had a musical Havdalah for Motzei Shabbat Shira. And I told a story about, of all things, Rabbi Nachum of Chernobyl. Now, this descendant of this great Hasidic master, through his Gateway Rehabilitation Center, founded in 1972 in Pittsburgh, has helped many thousands of people of all walks of life. And for all of his greatness, authoring over 60 books, an internationally acclaimed speaker, and a sign of this great dynasty, he requested at his Levaya no Hespedim. He only wanted one thing, that a nigun should be sung throughout. And indeed, if you saw the video, you can find it online. The Hasidim are carrying the mita and they're singing his nigun. Everybody knows his nigun. We sing it in our shul at the end of Hoshanot. When we come to the words, Hoshia et amecha, uvarech et nachlatecha, ureim v'naseim ad ha'olam. Indeed, Rabbi Dr. Abraham J. Twersky wrote the famous tune, Hoshia et amecha. He wrote that tune for his brother's, the time of his brother's wedding. He said he was davening not Hoshanot, but Shacharit. And as it turns out, of course, this pasuk from the 20th chapter of Tehillim is in the Shacharit every day at the right after Hodu, a series of psukim. This is one of them. Save your nation, bless your heritage, shepherd them, and carry them forever. Rabbi Twersky once relayed to his nephew Leib that the reason why he had this strange request that at his levaya, the only thing that should be spoken is that this nigun should be sung, is, as he explained, "I know that this song brought simcha to many Yidden, and I hope that it will be a zchus for me in Shemayim." We should think about this song a little bit and about this theme, Ureim v'naseim, to shepherd and to carry, two roles that we ask HaKadosh Baruch Hu to fulfill for us as a tefillah, but two ideas that we are called to as well, Ureim v'naseim, to shepherd others and sometimes to carry others. Now, Rabbi Twersky spoke often about the notion of human spirituality. He said spirituality does not mean religion. Spirituality, in his iteration, is what differentiates humanity from Homo sapiens. Homo sapiens, he explains, is a very sophisticated animal, but it is still not a human being. He referred to it in one place as an educated chimpanzee. Intelligence is not enough to describe the human being. Other characteristics characterize a human being, such as charity and self-sacrifice, the ability to resist desires and impulses, to delay gratification, to exercise judgment, to ask questions about life itself, about its purpose. You can be spiritual, which means to live by these kinds of tenets that are beyond the animalistic, and yet you do not have to be a religious person. And so he had deep spiritual insight, human insight into the neshama of a human being. He pointed out that Kedoshim Tiyu, the mitzvah that we have to be holy, the Ramban points out, can be an individual who is keeping all of the mitzvot from a technical perspective, and yet is a Navel B'Rshut Torah, an individual who is despicable, and yet finds a way to stay within the lines from a technical vantage point. We might say, more colloquial terminology, lots of trees, no forest. Now, if Parshat Beshalach from last week was about the ability of the human being to project into the future, which is, of course, a spiritual capability, and indeed by taking the two portions of man on Friday and thinking about Shabbos, and then an early exercise in delayed gratification, talk about an early edition of the marshmallow test. And when we get to Parshat Yitro, we find that Matan Torah itself, before we even get to the mitzvot themselves, the experience at Har Sinai is characterized by a nation recognizing its ability to experience limits. Kedusha means sanctity, and it elevates our awareness of Hashem's presence in a location, in a time, sometimes even centered around objects themselves that are part of Hekdesh. But each and every time, Kedusha is associated with withdrawal, suspension of the self, self-effacement, retreat. Consider that in Perek Yud Tet, in the run-up to Ma'amad Har Sinai in our Parsha, Vayomar Hashem Moshe, Lech el ha'am, v'kidashtam hayom u'machar v'chibsu simlotam. God tells Moshe, go to the nation, sanctify them today and tomorrow, and they should wash their clothing. Be ready for the third day, for on the third day, God will descend to the sight of the people and upon Har Sinai. V'igbalta et ha'am saviv lemor, delimit the nation around, saying, Hishamnu lachem, be careful, alot bahar negol bikatseu kol nogeh bahar mot yumat. Don't touch the mountain, anyone who does so will die. The idea of setting aside a space. And then, of course, V'omer el ha'am, further along, even marital relations are suspended, that human impulses are held in check. Why? For one reason and one reason alone, a mitzvah. Later on in the same section, the same theme again. Tell them, remind them, don't go too far, don't trespass over the line. And also be careful about the Kohanim. Vayomer Moshe el Hashem lo yuchal am la'alot el Har Sinai ki ata haidot banu lemor hagbel et har v'kidashto. You, God, told us to delimit it and sanctify it. This was a great tenet of the teachings of Rabbi Dr. Abraham J. Twersky throughout, that the human being gets their sense of self-esteem and self-worth from their ability to recognize their spiritual dimension. And spirituality so often associated with higher level functions. It's on display here at Zman Matan Toratenu, as we find it in Parshat Yitro. There's a book among the many books that Rabbi Twersky wrote called I Am I, and it's based on a quote from Rabbi Menachem Mendel of Kotsk. I should like to share it with you. It goes like this: if I am I because I am I, and you are you because you are you, then I am and you are. But if I am because you are you, and you are you because I am I, then I am not and you are not. This, in the inscription to the on the flyleaf of the book, forms the basis of an entire book for Rabbi Twersky, for Rabbi Dr. Twersky, about how a person's identity is formulated. And in essence, what he tries to construct is that so many people find their sense of self is only vested in how others see them. They see themselves only in relation to others, but they have no sense of who they are as a person. They see their professional role, they see their role in a relationship with someone else, but they have no personal sense of who they are as an individual. And that creates a certain dysphoria. And so he writes within this context that for the Jew, the revelation at Sinai, as expounded upon in the scriptures, Talmud and Kabbalah, provides the basis for an internal identity. We are taught that every person has a neshama, a soul of divine origin, and every person has a special place in creation. Every individual was created for a specific mission, which is accomplished by fulfillment of Torah and mitzvot. From the Torah perspective, he writes, It is Torah that gives a person an internal identity. I am a person created for the specific purpose of fulfilling the divine will as revealed in the Torah. That is my identity. That is who I am. Whether I am a woman or man, rich or poor, healthy or ill, and that is my identity regardless of where I am or whatever I do. And Rabbi Tursky, in many of his writings, comes back to this theme. I remember B'di Havi Uvda, when I was a teenager, I remember coming across on my parents' bookshelf this book, Let Us Make Man. And it had a deeply profound impact on me as a 16-year-old, 17-year-old when I read it. It's very hard to find this book online. I think on Amazon it retails today. I wanted to check how much, where I could get a copy. It's about $115 if you want to get a copy. It became a collector's item overnight. But Rabbi Tursky writes about this idea that for the Jew, the value system should be that which is prescribed by the Torah. The values of the Torah are not arbitrary. They did not evolve. They were not adopted by the consensus of a legislature. They're divinely ordained. They're absolute. They're not subject to modification. Good and evil are not determined by the democratic process. Murder, adultery, and theft are evil and will remain evil regardless of what people may wish them to be. The biblical saga of the city of Sodom, whose moral values were perverse, underscores this point. Torah values may differ from the prevailing secular values, but they're clearly stated in ethics of the fathers. For instance, he gives us an example. Power does not consist in domination over others, but in self-mastery. Wealth is not how much one owns, but the ability to be content with whatever one has. Honor does not consist of receiving tribute, but of giving respect to others. And there may be many relative values that cultures adopt and shift and change. But for the neshama, he says, this becomes an integral part of a person. An individual has given themselves over to this value system because they recognize that at their core, as a Jew, they're connected to Torah, connected with their neshama, means that they're going to, of course, understand that their role in the world is characterized by the fulfillment of mitzvot. So beautiful that Rabbi Dr. Twersky made his name in the world at large, championing the 12-step program, which, of course, as you know, the world of psychology and mental health generally, for a long time, was suspect in the world of what you could call generally the Olam HaTorah. It was considered antagonistic in certain ways. And that had a lot to do with one of the founders of the world of mental health as a profession, Sigmund Freud, a Jew in his own right, who claimed that religion was no more than a neurosis, was a construct of the playing out of various neurotic issues, and that belief itself was about a parent, parental figure and a transferential figure, et cetera, came this great Chasid from Chernobyl, and he understood that there was a core teaching in the 12-step program specifically, but generally within the world of psychiatry, that could be brought to bear to find, to understand the nekuda, the point within it that so often was so much aligned with spiritual values. Here's the first 3 of the 12 steps. Ask yourself whether or not you're struggling with addiction, if this applies to each and every one of us. Number 1, we admitted we were powerless, that our lives had become unmanageable. 2, we came to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity. 3, we made a decision to turn our will and our lives over to the care of God as we understood him. These are the first 3 generalized 12 steps. You can fit in if it's alcoholism or other addictions that go in here, but every Jew could find something in this. Now, Rabbi Twersky came at all of this honestly. His Elter Zayda was Menachem Nachum Chernobyl, Rabbi, the Rav, whose last name was Twersky, the same last name. And in that original Sefer written by a Rebbe who lived in the 18th century, so that's a century before Freud got rolling with anything having to do with the field of mental health. Just listen to the insight of the Me'or Einayim. That was the name of his Sefer. The Gemara says, Amar Rabbi Lazar, when the Jewish people, B'shashik dimri so nasla nishma, yatzta batko v'amar lehen migila lebanai razeh shemalachei ashart mishtamshing bo. When the Jewish people said Nasiv Nishman Har Sinai, right away there was a heavenly voice that proclaimed, who gave away the secret to my children that only the ministering angels know to put the word nase before nishma, to do before one. Nishma doesn't mean to hear auditory, it means to understand something, to comprehend what one is doing. Explain the Ma'or Einayim. The truth is, this is a deep secret, and the Jewish people understood this because ha'emetu sha'adam eino yachol la'amod tamid al madriga achat. A person cannot stay constant forever in their spiritual level, because the individual engages or is rather beset by vicissitudes of life. And sometimes they feel low. Sometimes they feel connected to Hashem. Sometimes they feel low. Sometimes they feel a great sense of what he calls chiyut, of being enlivened by relationship with God, ta'anug, pleasure, but afterward, v'chakach mistalek, v'nofel madregato. And where there's a secret here, he says, and there must be a secret about why this needs to happen, but he explains one of the reasons, at least, is that a person can then grow to the next level of height by going down. It's what others would refer to as a yerida tzorach aliyah, going down to be able to go back up. And he writes that the secret is to be able to keep plodding forward, even if a person isn't feeling it at that time. Because if a person is feeling so connected, so good, then they can start to confuse and conflate their service of Hashem with their own personal gratification. But if the constancy of action sometimes feels good, and sometimes we're Jewish people, we're mitzuvim, we're connected to Hashem because that's the mitzvah, that in and of itself is the nase coming before the nishma. V'zeu ikar hahiluch v'hanhaga ha'yisraelit. This is the path of the Jew, who is able to fall, but even when they feel less connected to Hashem, say, I'm going to keep on going. And this deep teaching, he says, is exactly what the malachim themselves, as it were, are engaged in, is to be able to plod forward as servants of Hashem, even at times when the emotional component doesn't seem to be giving us, so to speak, the sense of connection and return, and to come back to it again and again. You know, that's something that all of us are beset by. Even Rabbi Twersky admitted that this was a problem he had at certain points. He tells the story that one time he went to the kotel, he was sitting in a chair right next to the kotel, reading from a Sefer Tehillim. He was paying attention, I don't know, he was reading whatever. A man he saw came up very close to him, who he saw was holding a stick because he was blind. The man went right up to the kotel, put his hands on the kotel and kissed the kotel. He was running his hands over it. And then the man started to daven, without a sitter, obviously, just whispering very, very quickly. And a few minutes into the whispering, Rabbi Twersky says, I was watching him, the man abruptly stopped and he blurted out loud, "Oh, slicha, I told you that yesterday." And he went right back to speaking again. Rabbi Twersky said, I looked down at my Tillim book, but I wasn't reading the Tillim in the same way anymore. And we're always going up and down, even those of us who have the great benefit of living in such a beautiful Jewish community with a beautiful shuls and a beautiful svarim and a beautiful Shabbos, everything great. But even we, sometimes we need that recalibration and that sense that, yes, we have these emotional and spiritual vicissitudes. And yes, we have the capacity to engage the spiritual component of ourselves, which so often is bound up with the ability to set limits and to experience Kedusha that way. Hoshiat Amecha, save your nation. Bless your heritage. Ureim v'naseim. The wish is we want to be shepherded by a Kadosh Baruch Hu, means to be led. And also, sometimes we also want to be carried by Hashem. We want to be carried forward. The Radak writes here that Ad Ha'olam means that this fervent wish is indeed the tefillah that during the life of David, he davened it, but he said, Bein b'yemei chayai, bein acharei moti, kol yemei olam. For all time, it should be for the Jewish people that Hashem should shepherd them and carry them. We lost just this past week, what a great and beautiful gem of the Jewish people, but what a shining legacy. What a beautiful nigun of simcha he brought into the world, and what a nexus between the world of the spiritual and mental health and the way in which the Torah HaKadosha itself is indeed bound up with that. The genius, the deep insight of a Chasid from Chernobyl was a deep understanding of the human spirit, and being able to tease that out not only from the wellsprings of the knowledge of the world, but indeed to see it within our Torah HaKadosha, to reconnect us to our own neshamot, and of course, to our Kodesh Baruch Hu. Wishing everyone Shabbat Shalom.